There's an awareness globally that this creative sector, the use of talent and imagination, is not only very interesting to the people doing it, it's as ever artistically and culturally important, and it's a real business.
Você está trabalhando agora ao começar a assistir essa entrevista? Pode parecer uma pergunta estranha, mas o que é trabalhar hoje? É o mesmo que ter um emprego? No mundo em que podemos estar o tempo todo plugados, quando estamos trabalhando? Trabalhar, ser ativo profissionalmente, é fazer o quê? É mover algo de um lado para o outro, convencer alguém de algo, inventar uma coisa nova? Talvez tudo isso. Nos últimos 20, 30 anos, o mundo do trabalho mudou. A criatividade se tornou uma exigência profissional em quase todas as áreas. A economia criativa se tornou uma regra, uma questão de sobrevivência para empresas, países, pessoas. O Canal Brasil recebe hoje a pessoa que cunhou o termo, que desenvolveu a ideia de economia criativa, que acabaria por revolucionar o modo com o qual se pensa sobre o trabalho. John Hawkins, it is a pleasure to have you here with us today.
I'm very glad to be with you, talking with you.
E antes de começar, um lembrete, inscreva-se aqui no canal e siga Brasil nas redes sociais. John, 20 years ago, you published a book that presented the economic concept, the social concept of creative economy. This idea became used worldwide, and you pretty much are responsible for the consolidation of this sentence to describe the phenomenon. I'd like to ask you initially two general questions. What is creative economy? And as your book was published 21 years ago, is there any difference between your original concept of creative economy and what it is today?
Thank you. Those are two big questions.
No,
I like big questions. They're good. They're good. The creative economy was an idea that was sort of emerging in the 1980s and 1990s, and it was really based on the awareness in Europe and America and other countries that the art, design, media, and the beginnings of the web and online and platforms was not only culturally, socially important and culturally interesting to everybody, but had a business, industrial, economic importance as well. So what we tried to do was to get some data and alert governments to what was happening, and to say that if you add it all up together, if you add up media, culture, design together, you actually get a very significant sector, which we call the creative economy. So it was really saying, look, we all know these things. We all know art and design. We read books, we listen to music, we like to live in nice houses, etc. We like to buy nice clothes, etc., etc., etc. And we enjoy them as a cultural experience. But they're also economically very important. And a lot of young people in the 90s, over the last 20, 30 years, have wanted to go work in these sectors. And so governments ought to wake up and realize what was happening. So that was the clarion call, if you like, right at the end of the 1990s and beginning of the 2000s. What's happened since, and I've actually revised the book on 2 occasions. The last one is dated 2013, and I'm not going to do it again. That's it. The major change is the growth of online experiences, which has changed what is produced. It's changed the pricing of what's produced. It's changed the distribution of what's. It changed how we see and compare what's produced. in ways that it's very volatile and is changing year by year. So it's the introduction of online, the online world, if you like. Not getting into the metaverse, that's happening now. We can talk about that. But up to 5 years ago, online, whether it was printing or news or music, was radically being changed by digital platforms. So that was a major change. And I think the other major change was the fact that, in a way, that creativity and the creative economy had sort of become a mass movement. I mean, I've been to Sao Paulo, I've been to Rio, Porto Alegre, and I meet people there, and I have exactly the same conversations with the young Brazilians as I do with people in London or Shanghai or New York. There's a sort of global network, if you like, of whatever sector you're in, whether you're making a feature film, you're designing a building, you're creating a public square, you're designing fashion, clothes. There's an awareness globally that this creative sector, the use of talent and imagination, is not only very interesting to the people doing it, it's as ever artistically and culturally important, and it's a real business.
In one of your lectures, John, I saw you describing the creative economy as the first economy based on people. It is an amazing concept. Can you describe this idea, the first economy based on people?
Yes, it's this idea that the creative economy just depends on ideas, opinions, points of view that start inside the brain. This is the invisible work I talk about. Of course, we need talent, we need hard work, we need determination, we need to know the market. But it all starts on somebody having a view of the world and wanting to do something that is different and better. There's a transformative, there's a transcendental element in creativity, which is very, very particular to creativity. You don't get it in a lot of repetitive mass manufacturing, but it's absolutely essential in creativity. And that is the raw resource, the creative economy. The raw resource of economies up till now, for thousands of years, have been either land, property, labor, mass labor forces, to which you basically pay as little money as you can, or capital. Land, labor, and capital, that's the mantra of the conventional economist. And what is happening now is that the main asset in the economy and the main source of wealth in the economy is the individual imagination. Of course, we need land every so often. We need people, and we need a bit of money occasionally. But they're not the primary resource. In the old days, if you just owned land, you sort of became rich and you had status. That is no longer the case.
And John, is creativity a gift? Is it something a person born with, or is it open for everybody? Is it possible to teach it or to learn it?
I think everybody, every child is born with the raw resources of creativity. It's actually the process of being sensitive to what's happening and enjoying one's circumstances or not, and if not, then doing something about it, is the way the brain develops at a very early age. And if you look at the Harvard Center for the Study of Child Development has done tremendous work on this. And they show that the way in which a healthy child develops is a number of things. One of them, absolutely, crucially, is their ability to imagine things could be more comfortable for them, could give them pleasure, can be fun. Children have imaginary friends that are often more real than their real friends. They love stories. They love the same story again and again. They love dressing up. They love dancing. If they fall down, it doesn't matter. They just pick themselves up again and dance again. They love living in different worlds. And a healthy child exhibits all this playfulness and sense of exploration. And you see them imagining the next step that they might do. And whether it's painting on, they paint everywhere. They paint on the walls, they paint on the floor, they paint on themselves. They just love it. And then, of course, at the age of whatever, 4, let's say, they go to school. And then they have to socialize with other people. And that's one reason why you go to school, to learn how to socialize. And they're told how to behave and sit in a row and shut up and not paint on the wall and not talk. And this is, I'm not saying schools are a bad thing, I'm just, they're a good thing. But the side effect is that instinctive, playful creativity, that sense of exploration is clamped down. And for some people, they never recover. It depends very much on the home environment, it depends very much on their playmates, it depends very much on their teachers. Some kids are lucky. So the raw material is there at the beginning, at birth, and at the beginning. And for most people, it stays there, but they just find it difficult to bring it out.
But so you don't need to learn it. You have it because you're human.
You have it. You have that sense of play, and you have an imagination, and you can imagine things to be different, and you can do something about it. But of course, that, if you like, is the first step. You then got to acquire skill and talent, and you've got to acquire the ability to take your idea and persuade other people that it's actually a rather good idea. You've got to be aware of what you want to do with your idea. You want to persuade people about it. You want an audience for it. You want to sell it. And those things are not bought. And they're probably not taught, but they are learned. They are learned. And I do a bit of teaching, for want of a better word, but actually what I do is really only one thing. I try to give people confidence. I worked in television and film for most of my life, and I can teach them about television and film because I've been there and done it. But I can't teach them about fashion. I can't teach them about design. I can't teach them about art.
John, you were talking about creativity, but what is creation to you? Is it just something that is invented out of the blue, or your concept of creation is broader than that? What is creation?
I think very few things are invented out of nothing. I think almost everything is invented or dreamed of or created out of the stock of memories we have and the circumstances we find ourselves in, and putting two new ideas together that haven't been put together before, or taking a color from somewhere that you see maybe on the wall in a street somewhere. Maybe it's weathered by the rain and you see that's a wonderful color. I'll take that color and put that somewhere else. So it's continually looking around, being a bit of a jackdaw and taking colors, shapes, ideas that are interesting. You see them somewhere else. You think that could be interesting in my own project, in my own line of business. So I think it's a continual process of looking around and sifting and reshaping.
In your book, Creative Economy, you created an acronym to describe the creative process. It was RIDER. It stands for, and correct me if I am wrong, I think it is review, incubation, dreams, excitement, and reality checks. Can you guide us through your idea of the creative process?
I wrote those 5 things and I put them in that order because I wanted to get a mnemonic and easily remember the phrase. But I do say that one can start anywhere. One doesn't have to start at the beginning. And I also say that it's not a wherever you start, you just don't go through the 5 steps. You go through the 5 steps or the 3 steps and then the 2 steps and the 4 steps. It's a continual process. So you can incubate, which is the I, and in a way you sink into yourself. And then you can review it against other ideas that people have had. And to be successful at whatever you're doing, you have to know what everybody else is doing. If you're a poet or a designer, you have to have your own voice or your own style, your own look. But you also have to know what is out there. It's very hard to be, you can be a creative on a desert island by yourself. It's very hard though. It's not impossible. You can be creative in isolation. You can't ever have a creative economy in isolation. It's a market. And there are people out there who will know what else is happening, and you've got to know how what you're doing fits into that marketplace. So you've got to endlessly review it. It's got to give you excitement. The more I think about creativity, the more I realize that creative people have a deep pleasure. They receive deep pleasure through their work. It can be frustrating, it can be difficult, it can be awful, it can be lonely. One can fail. One fails, in fact, very often. There are more failures in the creative economy than in the property business. Very seldom fails. I mean, land is always there. Prices go up and down. Capital, sometimes it's wiped out, very seldom. Value goes up and down, exchange rates, interest rates, and so on and so forth. If you're trying to be creative, you can have disasters after disasters after disasters. It's part of the business. People fail much more in the creative economy than any other economy. It's very tough. I often meet people who think that being creative is a sort of soft option. And I always respond by saying, actually, it's harder than anything else you could do. And if you don't know that, then you won't do it very well. It's lonely, it's difficult. That's the fact. And all the people I know who are successful know that it's lonely and it's difficult. So it's a process, it's the rider process. You need to get excitement out of it. You need to get pleasure out of it. And in my book on invisible work, I do emphasize this notion of excitement, but also this notion of pleasure. It has to give you a very private pleasure. You can't instruct anybody to be creative. They have to want to be creative, and they have to be interested in what they themselves are doing at that moment. They have to get pleasure out of it. And if they don't get pleasure out of it, then they will lose interest and they won't do very well. And frankly, the game's over. I mean, that's it. There's no way back from that. So this notion of pleasure is very important. And dreams, the imagination, fantasies, thinking, why don't we do this? How about this? However crazy and stupid it might appear, you do your reality check. If it really is stupid, back off. But let's just try this and see what happens. And then after experience, you get better at hitting the target with something new.
In creative economy, you wrote that for us human beings, there is an us and up in hierarchy of goods, from the physical to the emotional and spiritual. When I read it, it reminded me of Thoreau, the writer, the thinker, Thoreau's book Walden, when he explains his decision to live in the forest by the lake. And he says that every person needs, first of all, food and shelter. And then that person can enjoy other things in life. They can search for something more meaningful. In your terms, first, the physical needs, and then, and I'm quoting you, emotional pleasure and intellectual satisfaction. In other words, people whose material needs are largely satisfied put, and I'm quoting you again, a premium on matters of the mind. Can you give us examples of these matters of the mind and why they are so attractive and makes the creative economy so important?
Well, I think it probably comes back to this idea of the creative economy as being an economy based on people. And I have to say, not all economists agree with me about this, because it's quite a radical change to say that the raw resource of an economy is individuals in their talent and their imagination, their talent. But I do believe that, and I think that is a profound change to the way we look at the nature of the individual and the nature of work. And this is where I think creativity and the creative economy are going to be really crucial in helping us to navigate the future of work. I read the book Invisible Work because I had spent some time wandering around the world talking about creativity. And there's one question I kept on asking myself, which is, why is it that people who are creative and inventive, they're different from me, from you and I, perhaps. They're just different. They think differently, they live their lives differently, they work differently, they have different criteria for good work. In a way, they're rather self-indulgent. In another way, they're extremely focused. And it's just different. And I wanted to try and pin down the nature of creative work. And I hit upon this phrase, invisible work. This is something that is increasingly important. And it's a challenge to management and to leadership. I realized that the fact of it when I was chairing a startup of about 20 people in London, and I was a non-exec chair. I was in 3 days a week. I knew everybody there very well. I'd appointed some of them myself. I wasn't the founder. I was brought in later. I knew them all very well, and I would come into the office, an open plan office, and I'd look around the office, and I had no idea what anybody was doing. I didn't really know actually whether they were working or not. They were all looking at their screens, didn't know whether they were working or not. That didn't worry me. I knew we were, as a company, working very hard and being very successful. But what did worry me was that I didn't know whether their work was going well or not. And my job was, along with the chief executive, was to make sure that if anybody did have a problem, we would know about it sooner and late rather than later and do something about it. And we didn't know. We just didn't know, because the critical work was inside the brain. And you would look at this person and they would look the same, as if they were having fun, not having fun, working very hard, or in a blind panic because they didn't know what to do next. And so I thought there is something quite extraordinary about creativity when it's a job, when it's work. And we have to sort of understand that more. Individuals have to understand it. Managers, leaders have to understand it. It's not about economics. It's more about philosophy and psychology and communications. So it was that awareness that there's a new kind of work that is contributing to creativity and invention and innovation, because to this extent, they're all actually very similar. They have some differences, but to this extent, they're all very similar.
But let's delve into it. In your most recent book, Invisible Work, you presented the concept of the difference between two ideas that most of people might consider identical: to have a job and to work. What is the difference between to have a job and to work? And what is this invisible work?
Well, yes, you're right. I had a great, my book was very much about work and not a job. I mean, I know many people who have a job and don't do very much work. And I know an awful lot of people, very large numbers of people in London, around here, who work very, very hard and don't have a job. And by a job, I mean employment, whereby they have a deal, a contract, an agreement with somebody else, and certain duties and responsibilities are laid out. And if they fulfill their duties and responsibilities, they will get paid at the end of the day or the week or the month at the end of the project. And of course that happens, but it's actually a diminishing number of people who are like that. And I was aware that, and I couldn't get data on this. I tried, it was very difficult to get any good data on it. But I realized that a lot of the people that were contributing significantly to the creativity that goes on in London were working in ways that did not fit the traditional idea of a job. Certainly the idea of a job as held by economists, measured by employment data. These people did not see their work in that way. They had a job, that was fine. The responsibilities they had listed in their job description in no way captured why they did the job, or how they did the job, or the pleasure the job gave to them. So I was trying to separate out the work that the individual does, whether or not they're in an employment situation or not, and the job, which is what the economists see as employment. And I was seeing an increasing split, a widening gap between those two ideas.
And you describe at the book the work as having two parts. Now, half of the work is invisible. I'd like to know what's your concept of this? What makes work invisible? But the other half must be visible. You have to pitch an idea to convince someone of something. Is it correct to consider that there are two different sets of traits in each half of work, how to do the invisible work and how to make it visible?
Yes, I mean, we need both. We need the ability to imagine and to shape our ideas. And then we need to manage the process by which we make our chosen idea visible. The moment we want to communicate it to our neighbor, our colleague, our group, our manager, our boss, our client. The successful creative person has actually to be very good at both of those things. That's quite rare. And if they're not very good at both those things, they have to find a colleague or a partner who is very good at both those things. So it's the ability to come up internally, privately, with this notion, which is, like all ideas, subjective. which is, let's say, why don't we do it this way? And then to manage the time and the manner in which you make that idea public, so that you hope other people will become as interested as you are. You have to, and it could be a line, it could be a sentence, it could be almost a joke. It needn't be a long explanation. And I talk about the way we can define it and describe it and name it, various little tricks and tactics for getting the idea out there so that other people are intrigued by it, they like it, you retain control of it, and you move it on to the next stage, because it's like in this, you are completely in control of the process, or you run the company, that you need help from someone. You need other people's ideas. You need a bit more money. You need a bit of equipment or asset, whatever it is. So putting it out there is a talent and a skill, and some people are very good at that, and some people aren't, and that can be learned. It probably can be taught a little bit, but you really have to do it by practice, and you will watch other people do it, and you'll just pick up what works and what doesn't work.
I want to ask you your impressions on working from home. The pandemic, of course, accelerated this trend, but a trend it was before COVID-19. In Invisible Work, you mentioned the brain as a new office. What are the skills that will become more important in the world of working without or with less office?
I think that's a very interesting question. I think the skills are not substantially different from the skills you need anyway. And my quick response would be, if you're working from home, or let's say if the company as a whole is working from home, which is sort of different than one person or the whole company, what you really need is colleagues and managers and leaders who are sympathetic to the idea of working from home. One of the big issues that I thought would arise, it has a little bit, but nothing like as big as I thought it would, is a conflict between what the company wants and what the individual wants. I thought the company might say, come in guys, come into the office, and the individual might say, no, I'm going to stay home. And that's happened a little bit, but the evidence for that is quite low, actually. So I think what's happened is that you need to work with your colleagues so that they feel you are working as much as you would be if you went into the office. And you need to judge this moment at which you talk to them and you talk to your boss or the project leader or your team leader, to make sure that they know what you're doing, and you're not telling them all the time, you're not telling them too often, but you are letting them know what's happening. And then I think, actually, it's not that different. It seems a massive change, and in terms of travel, transport, family relationships, caring, all that, it's a massive change. It would have been inconceivable 3 years ago, absolutely inconceivable. It happened very quickly in most countries. It happened not quite overnight, but within a week or so. Everybody stopped getting the office and went home. And, almost every company survived because of it. If the work could be done at home, obviously the work would not be done. If you're running a cafe, you can't work at home. The cafe has a problem. But if you're in a company that does depend upon cognitive work, then, which you can do in the office, you can do at home, you can do in a restaurant, you can do in a cafe, then actually working from home was remarkably easy. People got it, they understood it, and Zoom and Teams and other systems responded very, very quickly. And I think everybody's been rather surprised by discovering that we don't need to go to the office as much as we thought we did. It's still a good idea for some people. There's some people that need to be there all the time. I think it's a very good idea to go to the office if you're new to a company. You need to meet people, they need to meet you. And it's very good to go to the company and the office if you're young and your social life is going to depend on being in the office. I know when I was young, my social life depended on the office, and that was great. I loved it, and I would not have liked to work from home. Nowadays, at my age, I'm very happy to work from home.
It's correct to think that some traits are more important than others. You mentioned in your book, as I recall, the necessity of have presence in when you are working online, which seems like a contradiction, to be present without your physical presence. This kind of trait carries more weight. Personality carries more weight when you work not physically close to other people.
No, it's much harder when you're not physically close to other people. Well, I've been very lucky. I work with some very clever, bright, successful people in good companies, and I learned through sitting next door to them and just seeing how they did it, and which would have been much hard, and reading their body language. And when we left the meeting, we would talk about it, and I would learn a lot. And all of that isn't possible online. So this is why I think if you're wanting to learn, or you need to learn, or the company needs you to learn, then it should take steps to make sure you do get together. One company in London that I'm involved in, they did have a position in a co-working space. They had this, it's kind of about 30 people. They gave that up the second week of lockdown. Company was very good about it, cancelled the contract, no penalty. They stayed at home for 6 months. They then worked out where everybody lived, and they happened to live mostly in one part of London, which was about 2 miles away or 3 miles away from the previous office. So they rented another co-working space close to where everybody lived. And the prime purpose of that was to provide a base for having lunch, having a drink, for social get together, and for talking about, for everybody to talk about the projects they were doing and to other people. So it wasn't necessarily an internal project meeting, but it was telling everybody else what they were doing. And they maintained a very high level of personal interaction. And another company I'm advising in London has closed its big office of 1,000 people and set up 3 satellite offices around London, which have a joint function of providing meeting spaces and private offices and open plan, and a much higher level of social interaction. I think it's important for people to go and rub shoulders with, get to know, as friends, other people in the office. I mean, I remember when I joined companies as a new boy, you would turn up on your first day, and it was hit and miss who said hello. And somebody would probably say, "Oh, hello, who are you? Oh, come and sit here. Would you like a cup of coffee?" And that person will become a close friend. That doesn't happen on Zoom.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we need, if we want to do anything else than just do something mechanical, when we can do it at home, if we need to learn, and we do need to learn all the time, when we stop learning, we sort of die as a creative person. It's very hard to learn by yourself at home, however many Zoom meetings you're sitting on. You need to be close to someone, close, not intellectually, but also emotionally, physically, emotionally close to them and to become buddies. And the office is the perfect place for that.
John, in Creative Economy, back in the beginning of this century, you wrote that machines can produce but cannot create. Machines only discover something, but this something already exists. I think you cited Picasso telling about machines are useless because they don't give answers. And now artificial intelligence is considered by lots of people a real threat for lots of jobs. Can the, not necessarily work, but jobs, can the concept of machine learning change the future of work? And how to prepare yourself for these changes?
Yes, I mean, I did say that 20 years ago, and I talked quite a lot to some guys in MIT in America who were very convincing about this. I think what's happened now is my views have slightly changed because AI devices clearly can create, produce creative content, whatever you say, in terms of text, in terms of poetry, in terms of music, in terms of making images and paintings. And anybody looking at them would say, well, that's creative, you know, they've done it. There's a Chinese AI machine that is producing the most extraordinary, beautiful poetry. So I think what I would say now is that if you run lots of algorithms on a neural network, then you can produce creative content that is obviously creative and everybody would describe it as being creative. The process by which you're doing it is, I think, different. And I think the process that the machine is using has very distinctive qualities. And the process that the human is using and the meanings that they are attaching to it have very distinctive qualities. And so that's one area of difference. There's another area of difference, which is that the poet and the painter, the human poet and the human painter, don't just generate, produce a result, but they stand up and shout about it on their own. They may shout well or badly, but it's up to them to promote and market their work, and they have copyright in it. And machines don't do that. The machines can only produce this stuff if they're plugged in by a human, and the result only gets out there if a human sort of takes it and runs with it and promotes it and sells it. So that's a different level of sort of difference. But the main point is, can a machine create? And I was make my comment there, which is they can produce creative content, but the process by which they do it is different. I think this is a very interesting question, and I'm working on this at the moment. When a human creates, we do so as physical beings. We are an embodied self. We are aware of ourselves. When we write about something, we relate it to our own personal experience, and we are conscious of that, and we can talk about that. And machines can't do that, particularly if they're running if they're running neural networks. They cannot account for what they do. So very noticeable. I was fascinated by the AlphaGo AI machine that beat.
Different from the Deep Blue that beat Kasparov in chess.
Yes,
The AlphaGo learned to play Go.
absolutely. And there's a move that AlphaGo made. Game 2, I think it was, move 35, which Lee Sedol was completely surprised by, and all the Go experts were completely surprised by, and all the people from DeepMind who had programmed AlphaGo, they were completely surprised by it too. And the next morning at the press conference, the co-founder of AlphaGo, Veve Brown, was asked about this. And he said, well, AlphaGo became a bit aggressive. AlphaGo used its intuition. Now, that's clearly not true. I mean, it's a machine. It doesn't have intuition. But we don't have the language, and not even the guy that programmed it could ask it why it did this. So there's a, whereas humans are programmed from a very early age by their parents and siblings and school teachers to explain what they're up to. So there's a different kind of process going on there. I mean, to answer your main point, it's called the author economy in America. And it's individual creative people becoming creators and companies and owning their own stuff through copyright or patents or trademarks. And I think the development of the creative economy, the creator economy, the author economy, and its relationship with machines is going to be one of the most fascinating battlegrounds of the next 10, 20, 30 years. And I think it's going to be more influential, well, not more, it's going to be just as influential on the future of the work as robotics in warehouses, which is what most people are sort of worrying about at the moment, replacing humans, which they are and which they will do to a massive extent. That is already happening, and it's very clear and it's very obvious. The way in which software replaces human imagination, that I think is fascinating and will be equally important.
John, one last question, and I can't. I have to take this opportunity to ask you regarding Brazil. We like to think of ourselves. I think everybody does, but we like to think of ourselves as a creative people. The strength of Brazilian popular music, that probably bossa nova, the most internationally known, Carnival, the use of social media and new apps. Brazil is always one of the top users worldwide. At the same time, we are deeply, deeply unequal country. In the third decade of the 21st century, there's still hunger in Brazil. How can Brazil use creative economy to develop itself and become a more prosperous and fair country?
I've been asked this many times, and it's a tough one. First of all, you're absolutely right. Brazil is an extraordinarily creative country. There's no question about that. The music, I worked quite a lot with Gilberto Gil when he was Minister of Culture.
Yeah.
And he was an extraordinary man. His music is extraordinary. And his contemporaries, there's a group of them, 5 or 6 of them, made the most extraordinary music that I listened to a lot myself. The fashion, the music, the architecture, the style, the color, the dance, the theater, film. You rank really high. There's no question about that. Let's compare Brazil to India. India has a population probably 3 or 5 times as much. But Brazil, scores higher on every measure. So you definitely score as we say, you punch above your weight in terms of creativity. I think that what's been lacking is, well, I think there are two factors that are holding it back in a way. One is in spite of what Jill was doing, governments haven't really got behind it at the presidential level. What happened in the UK, what happened in France, what happened in China was that the president, the head of state, the head of government really got behind it. We did it in the UK because our manufacturing was getting very, very weak. Our agriculture was getting very small in numbers. We had a lot of people coming to university, and we had a great history of culture. And all these things came together, but it didn't really happen until Tony Blair became prime minister and said, this is absolutely crucial. So you need this to happen, not just at the ministerial level, but at head of state level or head of government level. And then suddenly the taps are open. And again, what happened here was Tony Blair didn't tell the film industry they were creative and wonderful. He told the ministers of education, trade, finance, foreign policy. He said, come on, guys, this is happening and you're not paying attention to it. It was that leadership within government that made the difference. And so it's not, the Minister of Culture is great and very important, and God, you need a good one. We all need a good one. But you need it at head of state level, head of government level. And then I think you just open the tap and it all comes out. And then you need structuring of your, what I would only call business and financial environment. So it has to be easy to set up a company. The tax system has to be able to cope with companies that are selling creative goods and services. Customs and excise, imports and exports, tariffs, that sort of thing. They have to, employment law has to cope. You have to make it easy for people to invest. So companies depend on investment, equity investment, and not on debt. Because if you overload your startups with debt and the first startup doesn't work, the founders are crippled. They can never get back into business. So encouraging an initial level of seed equity investment is really important. And your lending organizations and your banks and your venture capitalists, your private equity people have to understand that. And the people that have a lot of money in the country, whether the money comes out of agriculture, whether it comes out of manufacturing, they have to also understand that there's a lot of talent out there that they can help in their various ways. And finally, the government, which is probably, it certainly is in this country, in the UK, the biggest buyer of goods and services in the country. They have to commission their local creative talent, whether it's architect or design or whatever it is, they have to commission their local talent. It's over the last 25 years, starting in Europe, based a lot of the experience in America, there's become a fairly well-worn path to growing the creative economy. And the tools are there. And I think there are people in Brazil, I know the people in Brazil who know those tools. What is needed is a willingness at the head of state, head of government level, to make those changes, to sort of open the tap, if you like. And then there will be a very dramatic change. I look forward to it.
John Hawkins, was a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your time with us.
It's been a real pleasure on my behalf too. Thank you very much.